which is a national research nonprofit that's focused on ending mass incarceration. I work on a project that's specifically focused on reducing incarceration in small cities and rural communities where incarceration rates are actually much higher than in the biggest cities. Yet there's rarely any attention and focus on these places. And racial disparities are even more severe, right, as we talked about in the last film. So I'm really excited to be here this weekend. We've been partnering with Mano Amiga for the last 3 years and supporting the grassroots work that they're leading here in Hays County. And so it's really a privilege and an honor to be here with this amazing panel. And so I'm gonna introduce, I don't know what order all of our panelists are in, so actually I will let you all introduce yourselves, and then we'll hear a little bit about each of the films from the filmmakers, and then have a few questions for all of our panelists, and then we'll open it up for everybody else. So Senator Gutierrez, you can.
Oh, well, thank you. So my name is Roland Gutierrez. I'm a Texas State Senator in District 19, which spans from the southern part of San Antonio all the way to Brewster County, which is Big Bend. And I was part of our first film, Legalized Texas, with our director, Nico Vasquez, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about his role and why we got this project started.
Hi there, I'm Nico Vasquez, director of Legalized Texas. Legalized Texas kind of started off as like a Facebook series we had done with the senator, and it kind of just over the 2 years grew into something much larger. We knew we had something bigger there, so we decided to follow through with it.
Hello everyone, I'm Ricky Rhodes. I'm the director of Not Just Another Day, the last film that just played. And yeah, I mean, the way that we really started this story was from an article, just read an article that said that there are mass amounts of people still going to prison for cannabis, and I was just like, ha, that's not possible, you know, like it's legal in California and it's legal in so many places, and so we just created this film and got funding from a cannabis company as a sort of cathartic way to put themselves on the right side of history. And yeah, so that's really how the film came to be, and we're happy that it's on its tour, and we're happy that it's here.
Hey everybody, I'm Frankie Winchell. I'm also with the Vera Institute of Justice. I'm lucky enough to work with Sarah and individuals from Mano Amiga. Some of the focus of our work is redefining public safety and figuring out what makes communities safe, and that includes figuring out how to stop over-criminalization of certain communities and think about things from a community approach. So.
Hello, my name is Jake Rankin. I actually just got arrested for weed, marijuana last October, so I'm coming to show support, yes.
Hello, my name is Eric Martinez, and I'm the policy director with Mano Amiga. Mano Amiga is a grassroots community organization. We started in the spring of 2017. We have a vision of creating a corridor of resistance all along the I-35 corridor between Austin and San Antonio, and that means advocating alongside people who have been either criminalized or have experienced narratives of immigration. And we do that by pushing for policy that brings about systemic change.
Hello, my name is Arturo Mireles, the producer of Green Revolution. That was the opening film. Produced that for the senior thesis for the University of Colorado Denver for the film and television program. Captured the premiere year of hemp legalization in the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, and completed it at the spring of 2020.
Great, thank you so much. We're also joined by State Representative Erinn Zweiner. If you would just like to quickly say hi. Oh. We can't quite hear you yet. We're gonna just fix the volume. Sorry about that.
probably in the preference setting.
Yep.
Weird.
Maybe while we're getting that set up, if the filmmakers could just quickly each talk about what actually inspired you to really take on these projects, and what was the process like for you?
So, Senator Gutierrez and I had kind of been working together on his campaign, and we had this discussion about legalizing cannabis in Texas. It's something, you know, not too many people want to pick a side on when it comes to election time, but Senator Gutierrez definitely did, and he had met with cannabis companies before. He had talked to people, some of these people that we actually saw in the documentary beforehand, and he said, you know, here's this idea that I want to do. I want to film us going and doing a Facebook series where we talk to these people and we convince our voters in Texas that this isn't just some kind of, you know, you're not a marijuana if you need to and want to, you know, be involved with cannabis. So we went along and did that, and as we went through Colorado and Killeen, we kind of found that, you know, there's a bigger story here, so we decided to eventually return to Colorado, get more story, and visit a manufacturing plant. So, yeah, that's basically it.
Hi again. Not Just Another Day was, as I said, was kind of started from just learning about this problem. And I think one of the biggest things that we want to highlight here is that there's a big difference between marketing and reality. So cannabis companies market that everything is legal and that everything's great and that it's an amazing product, but people can literally go into a store, buy cannabis, and then leave that store and then go to jail and get a 5-year sentence. And so we're living in contradictory times here. And the cannabis industry wants you to think that it's all legal and that it's fun and that it's great, but there's a dark side to cannabis. And like the statistics in my film said, 142,000 Black Americans were arrested for cannabis possession in 2015. And now that's not cannabis trafficking, that's not one of the other 20 different crimes that you can commit for cannabis. That's just possession, 142,000. So this is still a problem, and since 2016, it's gotten better, but we've actually seen that the ratio is getting worse from Black to white arrests. So more Black folks are getting arrested, but the total number is going down. So yeah, it's a strange, contradictory time with this, and we hope that the entire country can legalize it so that people don't have to go to jail for a plant that, you know, people love.
I made this film, Green Revolution, as a senior thesis, like I said, for the University of Colorado, Denver. I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I enlisted in the Army in 2012, got out in 2015, and wanted to go to college, but I also needed to get off of the meds that the VA was prescribing me, saying the Army right before. And I left Texas to go somewhere where I can go to school, but also have access to medical marijuana. And I saw that there was a lot of misconceptions about hemp and how hemp was being confused as marijuana. And my documentary was to show the different alternative uses of the, not go into as much as what the cannabis industry is going through, but I went to the Netherlands to gather their perspective because they've been doing this for decades. And I also went to Idaho to gather their perspective because it was supposed to be a trial that was set in June 2019, where there was 2 drivers going to Washington from Colorado, and they were stopped in Idaho. And the trial was set for continuance, but our flight arrangements and lodging arrangements were there for that week right after I went to the Netherlands. So it was just, let me talk to the legislators of that area to see why this is being treated as a federal crime, where they're transporting hemp where there's no THC, and yet it's a mandatory minimum of 5 years for what they were doing. And it's being lumped as a drug the way cannabis is. And so going into it, it was just to show the differences of hemp and marijuana, and to show the uses of hemp for America.
Thank you so much. Representative Zweiner, are we good with the volume for that?
We still can't hear.
Okay.
We're good? Looks like we are.
No. Maybe? Right to the laptop? Would that work?
Probably get feedback.
Okay.
What about our cell phone?
Okay, well, in the meantime, let's start with you, Senator Gutierrez. Can you please tell us about, I know this past legislative session you introduced a bill to expand citation-eligible offenses to include things like synthetic marijuana and other offenses. Can you tell us a little bit about why you introduced this bill, what happened to it, and what you think was in the way?
Well, actually, our bill was, the Senate Bill 140 was essentially a full legalization. You know, the biggest problem that we have, and why we did our documentary the way we proposed it, certainly mass incarceration was always on our mind. We interviewed plenty of people to talk about the particular injustices that were happening in communities of color, Latino communities, African American communities. The biggest, however, I wanted to try to find a mechanism through Nico's art that we can talk to Republicans and say, guys, there's a whole lot of healing process that you're not listening to here. There's a whole lot of money, you know, that's how Republicans like to think, right? So we showed them the money. We showed them the job creation. We showed them all of the United States veterans, like this gentleman, that had come back from Afghanistan and Iraq and were loaded up with opioids by the VA. And you saw Brian Ortega in our film. Brian Ortega was just one person of many that we interviewed that was able to get off of the VA's harmful drugs that were, quite frankly, putting him into a comatose state. So we were trying to specifically talk to this Republican-controlled House and Senate. So to answer your question, what happened, it was the Republican-controlled House and Senate, and more specifically Dan Patrick. And Dan Patrick has this one, he comes from a generation, that Richard Nixon generation, and Nico did a great job finding that all of that imagery and citation work that he did of that time. That's essentially the spot we're in. And if my message to anybody that's here today or listening by Zoom in any other way is vote, get these folks out of there, because they have no clue about this, and they have no clue about the things that what Texans are really looking for. Common sense solutions to our problems. We've got to go vote and get these folks out of power.
Well, thank you for your leadership on this. Jake, so thank you so much for being here today to share your personal story. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened to you and how you experienced the criminalization of cannabis?
Yeah, sure. So last October, me and my girlfriend was right there. She was driving back from Austin we were going back to my place in San Marcos, and we went through a car wash, and she had gotten a new car, so she had paper plates. And I guess the plate got ripped off, and I didn't even know we were getting pulled over. And she's like slowing down on I-35. I was like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, we're getting pulled over. So, and I did have like some marijuana in the car, like 3 grams, I think. I was like, oh, probably won't go to jail, but I don't know. But yeah. So they search us. It was mine, so you know they took me into jail. They let her go. I got arrested on Friday at like noon. Yeah, it was like 12. I didn't get out till Saturday at like 7:30 p.m. And I was the first one in there, and I just saw like the jail fill up over time. Not to mention it was 2020 during COVID, so it was just really disgusting in there. I had a mask luckily, but as it filled up, they weren't really like giving any of the other people masks. It also said on the sign, like we could like read it from the inside of the holding tank, like 7, I think, max capacity. There was like 20 people in there, just crammed in there. Just really gross. The floors were nasty. Yeah, everyone in there that I was arrested with was either in there for like, drinking and driving, violent crimes, domestic violence, stuff like that, I was the only person in there arrested for marijuana, like, that day. Got out, some time went by. I ended up actually, my court date is next month, I believe, on October 23rd. And I had to get a lawyer for that, so I'm hoping, I don't get a too hefty charge. I don't really know what to expect with it yet, but hopefully it'll be okay. But yeah, that's pretty much my experience with it. Pretty unfortunate, but hopefully we can get away from this, to keep happening to more people. Because it's 2021 and it's time for that stuff to, go away. That's pretty much all I have to say about it, but thank you guys for allowing me to speak and share my, story.
Yeah, thank you. Unfortunately, Jake is not the only person to continue to be criminalized for cannabis, and not even here in Hayes County, even though that day you might have been the only one booked in.
Yeah.
Frankie, can you talk a little bit about the numbers, especially here in Hayes County, and how they compare to Texas as well as nationally?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So within a 6-month period, about 251 people were booked in Hayes County Jail for cannabis possession alone. And right, as Jake, you alluded to, in the time of COVID, bringing Jake to jail didn't make our communities safer, right? It actually might have made it less safe if we cram people and follow mass incarceration, especially in a time of disease and COVID, and those people go back out to society with really no change because they didn't need to pay a debt to society and have the possibility of spreading disease or recidivism due to their time in the space. There's an argument that maybe, bringing people into jail and prison because of marijuana is actually making our societies less safe. And I think that right when we talk about this cannabis issue, it's not affecting everyone at the same rate, right? We know that the criminal justice system targets different communities differently and more often. And in Texas, right, we see that Black people are arrested for possession of marijuana at 2.6 times the rate of white people. So it's a statewide problem, it's a national problem. And we also know that researchers show that people don't use substances at a different rate. So why are we arresting them at a different rate? But I think the most startling thing is, right in our own backyards in Hayes County, we don't see that number at 2.6 anymore. It's almost double of the state of Texas. We're talking about, right, what Steve D'Angelo said in the last film, 4 times the rate of white people. So as we kind of think about this problem, it's a problem that's affecting all of us. The criminalization of cannabis is possibly making us less safe, and it's targeting people who have been continuously targeted in our society. And as we try to become a more equitable and and accepting community and country, keeping cannabis as something that's criminalized is just like unacceptable and kind of, you know, impedes the progress that we're trying to make.
Thank you, Frankie. Eric, we can pass to Eric.
Oh, sorry, Eric.
Can you talk a little bit about Mono Amiga, what the organization has accomplished, and what's next, particularly around this issue?
Hello again, Eric Martinez with Mono Amiga. We got our start in 2017 after a series of ICE raids were occurring in Austin. People got together here at Guatemala, where Selena used to perform as a girl, and they asked the question, what would we do if, you know, ICE raids started to happen here? And ICE is Immigration Customs Enforcement. Looking into the data, though, we realized that the family separation that was happening due to the ICE raids in Austin, that what was actually happening here was family separation was happening every single day, but it didn't look like flashy ICE raids. Instead, what it looked like was everyday interaction with law enforcement. So very early on, we had deportation defense campaigns where we would work with individuals who were non-citizens and were basically brought into the deportation pipeline for what are called petty citation eligible offenses, like rolling stop signs, failure to maintain a lane change, and possession of cannabis being one of those. And so we saw that family separation was happening every day. Over the course of a year and a half, we were able to free 5 out of 6 people out from the deportation proceedings and bring them back home to their families. But the thing is that even though they were released, their immigration case was still proceeding forward, and some of those individuals ended up still being deported anyway. And so we also started to get so many requests for assistance that we couldn't quite feasibly keep up with it. And so we started to think about systemic policy change and how to really drive at that, which is what led us to push for what's called the Site Release Ordinance. Here in San Marcos, we're the only city in the whole state of Texas, that's right, the only city in the whole state of Texas that uses a force of city law to compel officers to issue citations for petty offenses like possession of cannabis instead of immediately arresting them. Yeah, thank you. And what that actually ends up meaning is that you aren't arrested on the spot. Your car isn't impounded right there. You are, that isn't happening if you meet this certain set of, circumstances. But the thing is that you still have a record filed. You still have to deal with the expunction process. You still have to deal with court costs and legal fees and perhaps the cost of pretrial supervision. And so while the Site Release Ordinance is groundbreaking and monumental and the first and only in the whole state of Texas and even Houston and the 4th largest city in the whole United States, their mayor passed an executive order citing the San Marcos model as something to follow. But the thing is that the time has long since passed to stop criminalizing this behavior that we know that people across racial demographics and ethnicities use at very similar rates. We here in Hays County have community members, Black community residents in particular, who again are criminalized fourfold relative to their population. Hays County spends millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer resources in prosecuting cannabis, when those resources could actually be better spent towards initiatives that actually make us better, social services, particularly in the time of the pandemic. So that's just the Site Release Ordinance. We help bring a community bail fund to this community, so if you have bond at $10,000 or less, you can work with our community partner, the Bail Project. They'll screen you, and they'll post up that full cash bond amount, and then they'll help you navigate back to your court date, and when you do, they get that money back and are able to bail someone else out again to create a revolving bail fund. We brought $5 million in indigent defense funding for this county, for a public defender's office, because Hays County has historically been underfunded in terms of paying for representation for those who cannot afford it, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. And so we have work on vaccine equity, we have a cash assistance fund for immigrant families. I can go on, and a lot of this isn't so much the work of myself, but of really, really wonderful people in my organization, like Councilmember Alyssa Garza, Jordan Buckley, Samantha Benavides, and many other people that just aren't here today. But where we're going is that next year in the fall here in San Marcos, we will be pushing for a ballot referendum or a referendum to effectively decriminalize cannabis.
Now I'd love to open it up to anyone from the audience if you have questions for any of our panelists.
If anything, I believe as medical marijuana should be pushed on, and how are we gonna ensure that, for example, the veterans who need a lot due to the PTSD and all the symptoms they receive from serving our country, that the doctors and the VA will provide that type of medical care, and they're not gonna push in pharmaceutical medication instead. So anything are you pushing on to make sure at least they start getting medication for them? I mean, marijuana?
Yeah, I can tell you that, I can tell you, look, we have a pretty weak compassionate use program in Texas, and it's called the TCUP program. Personally, I think it sucks. I don't think anybody that is a medical marijuana state considers our TCUP program in any way, shape, and form medical marijuana. Okay, let's be clear. Even with the new changes that we made in this last legislative session, and so incremental. Was it 1% THC, or does it go up to 5? It's like nothing. It's not infinitesimal in the THC levels. As far as doctors, what we saw in Colorado, what we saw in different places, it was that there was never a problem finding doctors to be able to administer cannabis. And I think that there will be plenty of doctors in the state of Texas that would be willing to expand to a medical marijuana. Even though I'd asked for full legalization, because I felt that that was the right thing to do, certainly would have been happy with a true medical health cannabis bill. It's certainly not the case, didn't happen this past session. I don't see it happening until some of these guys just get the hell out of there. And so the only way they're going to get the hell out of there is by us voting. And having more of us vote against them. And I hate to be divisive. I hate it that it's us versus them. And to be fair, there are a few Republicans in this space that agree with me, that believe that for the other reasons that I mentioned, that this is the right thing to do for economy, for job creation, because everybody else is doing it. And that one point that I made is based on the Interstate Commerce Clause. I mean, the minute that this thing did federally legalize, and God help, I hope it does, then all we could do is opt in, and we'll be buying product from Colorado, which is fine. But we lost out on an opportunity to create 30,000 jobs in Texas, to help a lot of people, and to do what many states have done, which is even have some of the retail shops requirement that you would have people that have been affected in this way. It's unconscionable that this young man down here would have to go into probation for a little pot case. But we've seen people in Louisiana before they got legal, they've gone to prison for many years for a tiny bit of pot because they had a 3 strikes program. It's not right, and this is where we are, and we are here because of what's happened many years ago. We're still living this nightmare.
Thank you.
I think Erinn Zweiner's ready for Senator, if you want to give her a call, give her.
Yeah, for sure. I have Erin's cell.
Perfect.
Erinn is a dear friend, and she is so cool. You guys are so.
Representative Zweiner, when we do, can you hear me? By the way, just thumbs up if you can hear me. Yes, great. Okay, when we do get you on the phone, if you could just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the bill that you introduced last session and what happened with it and what's next.
The question is why I don't have Erin's number in here.
I have it.
Do you have it? That's good.
I would call her on my phone, but I have like 5%.
I'm just trying to
I got
find it.
52.
You have it? So I've always had it, and for some reason I lost it.
Oh, I got it right here.
The whole
Or
was like,
like-
maybe it's all about
She's calling you. Yeah, it's funny because I've always had your cell, and for some reason it's gone today, but we got you.
Well, thank you for calling, Senator. I presume everyone can hear me with where you have the phone position now.
They sure can.
Well, my apologies, y'all. I've got a listening to the conversation. First of all, I want to say I fully support Senator Gutierrez's efforts towards full legalization. We need bills across the spectrum to push this issue forward on multiple fronts. And the legislation I filed, House Bill 441, was about taking an incremental approach around the possession of leaf cannabis. What the legislation would have done is it would have taken possession of leaf cannabis from a Class B misdemeanor to a Class C, which dramatically reduces the penalty. It would have said that possession of cannabis is not jailable. It would have removed the 180-day driver's license suspension, and it would have provided for an automatic, well, not quite automatic, but a mandatory expunction process. So if somebody requested an expunction, hadn't been charged with a similar crime recently, it would go off their record immediately. This makes it work in a similar way to many traffic tickets. In fact, a similar experience some people may have had is if you're pulled over for texting while driving, that gets handled in a very similar manner, often where the charge effectively goes away unless you are caught texting and driving again within a year. And the goal of this really was to try and reduce the harm that these laws do to Texans. Black Texans are 4 times as likely to be arrested for cannabis possession than white Americans, and that's despite similar rates of use. Young people in particular are vulnerable to being arrested for cannabis possession. And I think we're seeing a very big change in attitudes toward this, partially because cannabis use is so prevalent. My grandmother lives in Arizona, and they actually had full cannabis legalization on the ballot in 2020. My grandma is a Mormon. She's very socially conservative, and she voted for legalization. I asked her why, and she said because she didn't want any of her grandkids to go to jail. And so I know we're seeing that attitude across race lines, across socioeconomic lines, and across party lines. We are increasingly seeing more and more folks who don't want to personally go to jail for cannabis possession, or who don't want their kids to go to jail. And so we did have bipartisan support for this legislation in the Texas House. We passed it out with 88 votes, 88 for, 40 against. I'm wondering why we were missing so many people on that vote. But we had good votes for this bill. And we sent, actually, I'm sorry, this is where my math is wrong. There's 108 for, 40 against. And we sent it over to the Texas Senate. Unfortunately, the bill never got referred from committee. Now, there was a similar bill that did get referred on the Senate side. It was about cannabis concentrates by Representative Joe Moody, House Bill 2583. And what that bill would have done is it would have taken possession of a concentrate from a felony to a Class B misdemeanor like leaf cannabis currently is. The reason why that's really important is, first of all, a lot of folks don't realize that a single cannabis brownie of any size, any amount of cannabis in it, that's automatically a felony. And where that also comes in is with folks who do use cannabis medicinally, using an extract is often much more effective for them than trying to smoke leaf cannabis. And so folks who are using cannabis medically almost always end up immediately in this felony category. In addition, many people with a personal use amount of extract, again, often in the form of an edible or whatnot, don't realize that they are committing a felony by that, and if they had a joint, it would be a Class B misdemeanor. That legislation passed the House. It actually passed the Senate, but it picked up what we called a poison pill, an amendment that would have really damaged the hemp industry in Texas. That got negotiated off, which is quite complicated. And in conference committee, we actually had the bill set up to pass clean. And the conference committee signed off on that in both the House and the Senate, but it was up to the Lieutenant Governor to decide when and if he was going to pull that bill in for a final vote in the Senate. He did not pull it up before the end of session. And so that's sort of the place we've been in, and Senator Gutierrez can speak to this very well since he was very recently a House member. The House has been willing to work on these issues, and we really do have a bipartisan group of folks ready to work on quote-unquote right-sizing criminal penalties, including around cannabis. But we've tended to run into trouble in the Senate. A lot of that, from my perspective, seems to go back to the Lieutenant Governor himself. And so I think that's really where our challenge is right now to start moving the ball forward, is to try and get through that blockade and try to make this a big enough priority. So I really do encourage folks, who are going to do advocacy on this issue to spend a lot of their time with the Senate, because that is where we keep running into trouble session after session after session. But I do think it's really good that we keep having these conversations on the House floor, because it keeps increasing the comfort level for various members. We have new members every session that look up and get a little more willing to look at cannabis objectively, not with whatever stereotypes they formed around it, and make reasonable decisions that are good policy for Texans that do move us closer to where we should be, which is full legalization. And I should add, in addition to full legalization, going through and examining the records of folks who have been convicted of cannabis-related crimes and trying to expunge those where appropriate.
Thank you so much, Representative Zweiner. Sounds like there needs to be a screening of 3 films in the Capitol Rotunda.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Any other questions from the audience?
My name's John, and I'm here today representing Green Botanicals in New Braunfels. And so I just have a very practical question, because I talk to so many people every day who are interested in either website links or phone numbers, emails, anybody that they can contact, get in touch with, stay updated to, what is the most current thing with all this, because there are so many people. I mean, week in and week out. So if there's any links, contacts that I can take back and just present to the average person that comes through and benefits, daily from the plant medicine, I just wanted to put that out there that I'm interested in taking that information back, sharing it with the community. So if anybody here can help me with that. I'm new to Texas, from California, so I definitely grew up with and watched the transition of legalization. I've managed some dispensaries and grow operations, so I'm familiar with the industry before and after. And yet I'm still trying to kind of catch up with Texas and learn. So yeah, anybody hearing that, I'm just putting that out there. And thank you guys so much. I feel your pain. I think it's all going in the right direction. I really appreciate what you're doing here.
Does anyone have any? I guess if people do have resources to share, find this person. Yeah, okay, we'll take you and then we'll go to you.
I just thought I would make a comment that as a senior citizen, after the death of my son, I became, of course, depressed. And they put me on antidepressant. I've never been so depressed in my life until I stopped taking it abruptly, because I saw what it was doing to me. I could not get out of bed. I had all the symptoms of depression plus, and so doctors don't know much. And so that's the only thing that they want to offer you is something that makes you worse, just like the gentleman saying we've heard over and over and over from our veterans.
Thank you for sharing, and I'm so sorry for the loss of your son.
Thank you.
Jesse Williams with the Texas Cannabis Collective. Something I noticed in one of our movies was we talked about in Not Just Another Day was that the individual got pulled over, $1,900 in a sock. In this state, it seems that our police departments budget in for civil asset forfeiture, and that they're part of the opposition for us changing the law, because once we do change it, they lose that. And I'm wondering how we can start promoting that this is a win for them, given the figures that you gave, Senator, that we're going to bring in this tax revenue, so we could actually start properly training our police departments. Even for our hemp program, we're seeing vehicles get pulled over that are part of a legal program, and the police don't have the knowledge for this. So I want to know if there's a way as we as advocates can start painting this in a way that the police see this as a win.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you a brief answer. I mean, we came up with a figure about $3.6 billion that we could raise revenue, tax revenue, about $3.6 billion. My numbers are Colorado's numbers and they're Washington State's numbers. We multiply it by the size of our population difference. We're 6 times the size of Colorado, we're 4 times the size of population as Washington State. And we budget per biennium, so every 2 years. And so these are real tax revenue dollars. And let's just say it's $2 billion. Let's say it's $1.5 billion. It's something. It's real. Our bill proposed. Listen, again, I'm having to deal and talk to Republicans. Politics is the art of compromise. And so I said that we put some of this money towards law enforcement. It's not where I would love the money to go. But you heard from Jonathan Singer that did a heck of a job in Colorado. And he says we will be able to supplement our police departments with healthcare professionals that would go out and talk to people that had been. We lost a veteran in San Antonio that was greatly depressed, sergeant in Iraq, and they had a welfare check on his home. This was last December, and police left. They came back another couple of days later, welfare check. He had a knife on him, and he never raised that knife up at all. Anyway, they killed him. You never saw this on TV much. That could have been avoided had you had someone that wasn't just a police officer there. Had you had some healthcare professionals there too, and we had our budgets allowed the ability to be able to have that happen. So to your point, we could do a great thing for these types of for municipalities and give law enforcement a whole ton of money. CNN did a piece on 2013. It's called "Driving While Black," and it was unfortunate. It was filmed mostly in Texas and North Texas, and it was all about how these cities and small cities and counties funded everything like just traffic tickets, and they were taking people's cars away and their jewelry and everything else. It was a 3-day documentary. It was horrific what was happening in North Texas, and it's still happening now, unfortunately.
Thank you. Sure.
I just want to say something from the research of doing my film, and then I have a question. So Lionel Tate, he went to jail for 2 days and then got 3 years of probation, right? While we were doing research, we were interviewing people who still had life sentences for cannabis. And we chose to do the story on Lionel Tate because we wanted to also show how sticky our criminal justice system is, even with the slightest brush up against it, 2 days in jail. And so that's really why we took on this project. And so this kind of comes to the prison system, the private prison system. And so I just have a question for you about private prisons and how you feel about private prisons, which if their business is incarceration, doesn't that naturally lead to a lot more incarceration? Isn't that part of their goals? So what do you think about private prison?
Yeah, no doubt. I'll tell you, and I could answer, but I'm going to let the state representative answer just because I think she's still here. Erinn, you with us?
I am. Can you summarize the question for me now? It's a little hard to hear.
What do you think about private prisons? I know that you and I think about the same things, that these prisons are essentially supplementing that the prisons are essentially, part of this problem, and these private prisons are. So I figured that I can answer, but I know you can too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the profit motive is incredibly powerful. And when you create a profit motive to lock people up, you're going to have people lobbying the halls of power for us to lock more people up. And I think that is exactly what we still have going on. And it's incredibly unfortunate. There is one prison in House District 45. It's up the road in Kyle, and it is a private prison. I think that's unfortunate. I would love to see us discontinue the use of them. Unfortunately, at this point, it's probably not something we can end overnight. It's something we would have to build a phase-out plan for. But it's going to be very difficult for us to do if we continue incarcerating the number of people we are. And especially if we're going to repurpose Texas prisons to hold migrants from the border. That's gonna make it even more difficult. So I hope we can get the numbers together to support Texas divesting from private prisons. But quite frankly, we don't have the votes yet in the building. And so I really hope activists like yourselves will help us build that momentum to be successful in that push.
I also just want to note that nationally, private prisons are only 9% of our carceral state. So these are public jails, these are public prisons, they're run by your locally elected officials, right? In Hayes County, they just built a 700-bed jail. Is that how big it is? That was county taxpayer dollars.
$90 million.
90 million county taxpayer dollars. And most prisons are run by the state, run by our federal government. And so, yes, private prisons are a problem, but you know, so are public, and that's, you know, you, as the people, as the public, it's, you know, up to you and your local decision makers to really end that problem. Eric, did you want to add something?
Yes, and I just wanted to touch on the fact of, you know, reallocating, you know, any type of revenue towards law enforcement. So, you know, here in Montamiga, you know, we're a small, relatively rural county and city. And what we do is we really rely on organizational partners in big cities who've been fighting the fight for, you know, decades and generations to learn from their perspectives and then tailor that to our own locale. And what we actually see is with the decriminalization and the lack of persecution in Travis County north of the line, where cannabis isn't so much of an issue, what you saw is that law enforcement started to do other things. You know, you can't really separate cannabis from policing, and it's not as if giving them more money is going to, you know, continue to have them continue to police communities. And so I just want, for me personally, to advocate that any revenue goes towards social services, investments in our community, things that do actually make us safer, you know, mental health services and UBIs. And I understand that, you know, there are very real political realities and political power that really want those investments in carceral systems. But reality, the rationale doesn't make sense, because, you know, when quote unquote crime is down, we need more police. When quote unquote crime is up, we need more police. And we've been doing that for 40, 50 plus years, and it just isn't working. And I think that law enforcement officers are incredibly stressed out. Community members are incredibly stressed out and don't feel safe within their communities. And so we need to just completely have a you know, radical shift in the way that we talk about just our laws and civilianize many aspects of law enforcement, such that we're not sending officers who are supplemented with mental health care providers, but rather have entirely distinct services altogether that aren't based in the institution of policing, because that kind of tempers and tailors their logic and approach.
Thank you so much.
Can I just add one thing, and I'll wrap it up really quick? At the Vera Institute of Justice, we looked at a lot of alternative to enforcement and alternative to officer response. And I think the way that you sell this to law enforcement is to talk about it logically. Police are here to stop violent crimes, right? Police aren't here to get the cat out of the tree. They're not experts, as much CIT training as possible, to deal with mental health. They're not even really here to be community liaisons. They're police. They're here to save us from violence. So we're seeing in places like Berkeley, California, they've taken police officers out of traffic stops, right? We see mental health professionals overtaking policing, like you said, Eric, right? In Oregon, through Cahoots and other spaces like that. So there are models that are working, and police aren't suffering. Their budgets aren't changing. They're just being given more time with the same amount of money to do their actual jobs and not entrusted with more things. So I don't think it's a selling point for officers. It's simply, let's give you more time to do the job that you're supposed to do and not other jobs that you're not.
Thank you so much to everybody for sitting on our panel today, to the filmmakers for all of the work that went into those really amazing films. Senator Gutierrez and Representative Zweiner, and your unwavering commitment to continue bringing this up legislation after legislation. It's tough. And to everyone here for showing up today and being part of this film block, and be on the lookout for next fall when there will be a ballot initiative around decriminalizing it here in Hayes County. And if you want to learn more, please come up and talk to Eric from Mono Amiga. If you want to learn more about what's going on nationally, you can talk to Frankie and I. And if you want to learn about any of the films, talk to these filmmakers. So thank you so much.